Welcome to Threads of Truth, the podcast where real-life mysteries meet internet speculation. Today, we confront a really haunting enigma, the disappearance of Dr. Sneha Philip. She was a young physician, who vanished just hours before the September 11th attacks. So the big question is, was she swept up in the unimaginable chaos of that day, a victim? Or did her story, which we know was already burdened by some personal struggles, actually conclude before the towers even fell? This is a question that's really echoed, hasn't it? Through courtrooms, it's haunted her family for, over 2 decades now, and it still ignites this passionate debate among, amateur sleuths online and professional investigators too. Just try to picture it. A vibrant, smart New York doctor, Sneha Philip, last seen doing something totally mundane, just shopping on September 10th, 2001. And then the very next day, this national tragedy erupts, changes everything, the city, the world. So the central question for us, and for you listening, it's huge. Is Sneha a hero, an unsung victim who just instinctively ran into the burning towers to help? Did her documented personal struggles, her troubles, lead her somewhere else? Maybe a darker path? With the 9/11 catastrophe becoming this unforeseen tragic cover for whatever really happened to her. It's a case that really makes you grapple with what we can actually know for sure and how these huge historical events cast such long, complicated shadows over individual lives.
Yeah, what's so compelling, I think, about the Sneha Philip case is exactly that, how a deeply private individual mystery gets tangled up, like inextricably, with a global catastrophe. So in this deep dive, we'll try to systematically unpack this complex web. We're talking about intimate personal details, the very contentious legal battles that try to define her fate, and just a frustrating array of conflicting clues, really. It forces us to confront how much we can genuinely know about someone's final moments when, direct evidence is scarce. And the emotional context is just so overwhelmingly powerful. We're not just dissecting a missing person report here. We're looking at a narrative that kind of shifts and morphs, right? Depending on which pieces of this intricate puzzle you focus on, and maybe even which outcome you perhaps subconsciously want to be true. It's a really sobering reminder that, certainty is often a luxury when you're dealing with ambiguities this profound.
Okay, so let's try to unpack this complex story. It's emotionally charged, for sure. Let's start by understanding who Dr. Sneha and Philip really was, beyond the headlines and that connection to 9/11. At the time she disappeared, she was 31, an internist, originally from Chicago. And she was, by all accounts, trying to build a medical career in Manhattan, handling the demands of that profession in a super competitive city.
Right. And to give you a fuller picture, Sneha had recently married Dr. Ron Lieberman. He was also a physician. They lived together in an apartment in Battery Park City. Now, this location, it becomes chillingly significant later on. It was just 2 short blocks from the World Trade Center, the Twin Towers. This closeness, it's not just geography. It literally places her right at the historical epicenter of one of the defining, most devastating moments of this century. Understanding where they lived, her job. It's crucial. It lays the groundwork for so many theories about what happened.
And this is where the story of this seemingly conventional young doctor takes a really significant and frankly quite unsettling turn. Our sources show that Sneha had, a documented troubled personal life. And this wasn't just minor stuff or typical arguments. The records point to a history of struggles with both alcohol and drug abuse. And this had led to serious professional problems, including a major suspension from her residency program. Why? For missing work consistently, not doing her duties. So this wasn't just personal anymore. It was hitting her career hard. And adding another really unsettling layer, there was a restraining order filed against her husband, Ron Lieberman. That's a pretty undeniable sign of severe marital problems, maybe even, domestic volatility. Plus, reports came out about alleged infidelity on her part. And it seems it was understood she was seriously thinking about divorce. The marriage was clearly in crisis. So it paints this vivid, though tragic picture, doesn't it? A woman dealing with huge personal demons, big career challenges, right before she vanished. This context is absolutely vital for understanding her situation properly because it immediately opens up possibilities beyond just 9/11 and makes you ask, how much did these deep personal battles play into her final hours?
Exactly. That background is absolutely critical. It introduces this complex set of variables, making her disappearance much less straightforward than you might initially think, especially if you only look at it through the lens of 9/11. If you connect this to, say, other missing persons cases, it forces you to consider she might not just be a potential victim of the attacks. We also have to seriously think about the other paths someone going through that kind of personal turmoil might unfortunately take. So this raises a really important question for our deep dive. To what extent do these pre-existing personal struggles legitimately impact and maybe even complicate how we interpret what happened on those days in September 2001? It really challenges us to look beyond just one, perhaps convenient explanation.
That's a really powerful context to keep in mind. Okay, but before we get into speculation or theories, what are the hard facts, the documented movements? Let's try to lay out the factual timeline, starting with September 10th, 2001, the day before everything changed. So the morning of the 10th started in a pretty unusual way for Sneha. A bit unsettling, maybe. She had a court appearance scheduled. It was related to a disorderly conduct complaint. Now, sources say this charge was eventually dropped, but just the fact she was in court for something like that, it sets an uncommon tone for her last known day, doesn't it? It kind of subtly hints at a life with some underlying volatility, even on what should have been just a normal Monday. This wasn't like running an errand, it was a legal issue, suggesting some level of personal unrest.
And this seemingly ordinary day just gets progressively more mysterious as it goes on. Later that day, Sneha called her mother, Sneha Philip. But interestingly, she didn't use her own cell phone. Now, okay, maybe not that weird for 2001, but it still makes you wonder. Instead, she used the cell phone of a man identified only as Chris. This detail just injects this element of the unknown right away. Who was Chris? Why was she with him? Why not use her own phone? Was it just borrowing a phone? Or was there something more to it? Unfortunately, this Chris figure, he remains pretty elusive in the official record. Just a small, nagging loose thread in her final hours. An unaccounted-for person who might have been one of the last to see her or talk to her before she disappeared. As far as sources show, the investigation never really pinned down who he was. It's just frustratingly unresolved.
Okay, so here's where we get the most solid evidence about her movements that day, but it's still unsettling. In the afternoon, around 4 p.m., Sneha was caught on security camera footage. She was at Century 21, that huge department store that, ironically, sat right across the street from the World Trade Center complex. She was seen shopping alone, and among the things she bought was lingerie. This image, just a fleeting glimpse of a young woman doing a totally normal thing, is often cited as her last confirmed sighting on camera. And there's this incredibly eerie sense of finality about it, isn't there? Just an ordinary life, unknowingly right on the edge of this huge cataclysm unfolding literally across the street. That mundane act just contrasts so chillingly with the horror that was about to happen.
Right, but the precise timeline actually extends a bit beyond that Century 21 sighting. It adds more detail to her last known evening. Other security footage, pieced together later by investigators, also put her at a downtown liquor store. She bought wine there. And significantly, the very last known confirmed sighting of Sneha Philip was at the WTC Marriott Hotel. That was at 8:43 p.m. that evening, September 10th. So this pushes her known whereabouts much later into the evening, and crucially puts her extremely close to the World Trade Center complex just hours before the attacks. It confirms she was definitely still in the vicinity of what would become Ground Zero quite late into the night.
And as that night, September 10th, turned into the early morning of the 11th, her communication, or maybe the lack of it with her husband, Ron, that becomes a crucial point too, full of speculation. Apparently, she sent him a message saying she'd be home later that evening, implying she expected to return to their apartment. But Ron, he'd worked a late shift, right? So he went to sleep early. He never actually saw her come into the apartment or found her there when he woke up. This leaves this critical gap. If she did come home, he wasn't awake to confirm it. So her presence in the apartment in those pre-dawn hours of 9/11, it's unconfirmed by the person closest to her. Her exact location that morning is just shrouded in uncertainty.
So the morning of September 11, 2001 arrives. Ron Lieberman leaves for work early. He assumes Sneha is still asleep in their apartment, like you normally would. What happens next, of course, changes everything. Brings in this new era of global consciousness, unparalleled tragedy. After the Twin Towers fall, this catastrophic destruction, though their apartment, remember, just 2 blocks away from the epicenter, it gets significantly damaged by debris, dust, all that. But critically, it remains structurally intact. It wasn't destroyed. It wasn't directly hit by the collapses in a way that would suggest, immediate death inside it. This is a really important detail because it raises a basic question. If she was home, would she have been trapped or killed instantly? The state of the apartment, it complicates a simple assumption that she was a direct victim from their residence.
And this leads us to the crucial missing evidence, or maybe, more accurately, the evidence that wasn't missing. which has puzzled investigators and really fueled endless theories. When Lieberman was finally able to get back to their apartment later that week, he found something really puzzling. Her driver's license and several credit cards, still there, just left behind in the apartment. Yet, paradoxically, her cell phone was gone. And what's more, a thorough check showed absolutely no digital activity at all on any of her accounts. Phone records, credit card use, banking, nothing after September 10th. No hospital records show she treated victims at any triage centers, no confirmed sightings of her at Ground Zero or anywhere else after the attacks started. The specific, perplexing mix ID left behind, phone gone, complete digital silence, it creates this void of fact. And it fuels so many competing theories about what ultimately happened to her. It just begs the question, why leave the essentials but take the communication device?
That combination of details, it creates a profound void in the narrative. It's not just a missing person case. It's someone whose digital and financial life just abruptly stopped, yet who seemingly left behind essential personal items you'd normally take if you were planning to leave for, any length of time. It seriously complicates the straightforward idea of her just going to help. A doctor responding to a crisis would instinctively carry ID for access, a phone for communication. It also challenges the idea of a planned, voluntary disappearance. Usually you take your ID to start a new life somewhere else. This fundamental paradox is absolutely central to the enduring mystery.
So, this perplexing situation inevitably leads us to the long, often contentious legal battles around Sneha's disappearance. Initially, like so many others after 9/11, her case was just treated as a missing persons case, plain and simple. Her husband, Ron Lieberman, and her family, they diligently filed the report. They were driven by this profound belief that given how close she lived to the WTC and her being a doctor, she must have died in the 9/11 attacks, an unsung victim of that awful tragedy. For them, it was really the only plausible explanation. It offered some kind of meaning to her absence.
Right. With the NYC Medical Examiner's Office, they operate under very strict forensic protocols, right? They took a more cautious, evidence-based approach. In 2003, after looking at everything, they issued a ruling. They said it was not conclusive that Sneha had died in the World Trade Center. This initial decision meant her name was officially kept off the 9/11 victim list, which is being meticulously compiled. Their reasoning was pretty precise, rooted in their scientific job. First, there was no physical body, no human remains identified as hers. That was the main way many victims were identified. Crucially, there was no concrete evidence she was in the World Trade Center complex, like phone records pinging there or security footage placing her inside, which they checked for others. And maybe most compellingly for them, she was last definitively seen alive on September 10th, not on the day of the attacks itself. So from a purely forensic evidence standpoint, they just lacked the definitive proof needed to link her directly to the disaster site.
But Sneha's family, they were relentless. They wouldn't accept the medical examiner's classification. Led by her husband, they refused to let it rest. In 2004, they took legal action, hired a private investigator, and they mounted this compelling argument for her inclusion as a 9/11 victim. Their case centered fiercely on her living just blocks away, her being a doctor, and the, inherent instinct a doctor would have to rush towards the scene of such massive devastation.
Right. The investigator presented testimony suggesting it wasn't just plausible, but highly probable. Either she was actively rushing to the towers to give medical help, or maybe she was just a bystander caught in the sudden, overwhelming chaos right outside her door.
And their persistent efforts worked initially. A judge in New York did declare her a victim of 9/11. This gave the family some official validation, and they hoped, finally, some closure.
But that initial legal win, it raised important questions, didn't it? About the different standards of evidence. A medical examiner versus a civil court. The ME's office wasn't ready to give up. And in 2008, a higher court delivered a pretty big blow. They overturned the lower court's ruling. Their reasoning was stark. It focused heavily on what was not proven. They prominently highlighted Sneha's documented personal issues, which, they argued, introduced other plausible reasons for her disappearance. They stressed the continued, persistent lack of direct physical evidence placing her in the WTC on September 11th. The court basically said it was equally plausible she left the city or died somewhere else entirely. They pointed out, again, her last confirmed sighting was September 10th, not the 11th. This ruling strongly hinted that the family's understandable, powerful desire for closure was maybe overriding the undeniable lack of hard evidence. It really underscored the legal system's struggle with definitive proof in such an ambiguous, emotionally loaded situation.
So the legal battle just went back and forth, a real testament to the deep uncertainty and the deeply felt needs of the family. But the saga did finally end later in 2008. An appeals court reinstated the family's petition, officially declaring Sneha Philip a victim of 9/11. This decision meant her name would, in fact, be etched onto the 9/11 memorial. It was a victory for the family, definitely, but one that came with some pretty significant footnotes.
Yet, what's truly illuminating here is that even with this final legal ruling, the contentious nature of it all and the underlying ambiguity, it really lingered profoundly. The judge who made that final ruling actually admitted quite candidly that it was based on an imperfect record, and crucially was significantly influenced by the emotional context of the case. That's a pretty remarkable admission, isn't it? It highlights the immense societal pressure, the fervent desire for answers and closure after such a huge tragedy, even when conclusive, irrefutable evidence just isn't there. It shows how the legal system, while trying hard for objective truth, sometimes has to grapple with and ultimately accommodate that powerful human need for recognition, for dignity, for some sense of resolution when faced with immense collective loss. It feels like a compromise born out of compassion and circumstance, maybe more than definitive forensic proof.
And so her name is there, etched on the 9/11 memorial, a permanent fixture. Her family continues to honor her as a hero. It's a powerful, enduring testament to the complex, emotionally charged, and ultimately, yes, ambiguous legacy of this case. A deeply personal mystery forever tied to a national trauma. It really shows how, even with an official legal declaration, those underlying questions can just persist, creating fertile ground for more speculation. Okay, so now that we've laid out the documented facts as best we can, navigated the twists and turns of the legal process, and acknowledged the deep emotional landscape here, let's unpack where the internet steps in. With its boundless capacity for speculation, for collective investigation, this is where we see just a myriad of theories pop up, often trying to fill those frustrating gaps where concrete evidence is missing, or just offering alternative stories that try to explain the enduring mystery of Sneha Philip's disappearance. The digital world has become this powerful, if sometimes, let's face it, unruly forum for grappling with these kinds of unresolved enigmas.
It has. And these internet theories, while, yes, sometimes speculative, sometimes born from very different online corners, they often stem from a genuine, understandable human urge to reconcile the known facts with the overwhelming uncertainty around Sneha's fate. They represent these collective attempts by lots of people to make sense of what happened when the official explanations or the lack of clear evidence just don't satisfy everyone. They also often reflect the really diverse perspectives people bring when interpreting human behavior, motivation, and that complex interplay between individual lives and huge historical events. It's a fascinating study in collective problem solving, really, even when the solutions stay out of reach.
Let's start with what became the officially recognized belief, the one backed by the family, the 9/11 hero theory. This theory suggests that Sneha, living right there, so close to the World Trade Center, and crucially being a trained medical professional, she would have instinctively run towards the chaos, towards the destruction, to help. It's a really compelling narrative, isn't it? It aligns so powerfully with all those countless acts of selfless heroism we saw on that horrific day. It paints her as someone true to her calling, rushing towards danger to aid others.
Right. And within this theory's framework, the consistent lack of evidence, no remains found, no definitive phone records from the site, no confirmed eyewitnesses seeing her at ground zero, that's often explained by the sheer, utter, unimaginable destruction from the tower's collapse. The argument is basically that the pulverization of the buildings was just so complete, it made it impossible to recover all human remains or identify every single victim, especially anyone who might have entered the buildings or just the immediate area after the initial impacts. Her phone calls and voicemails from September 10th. In this view, they're just her going about her day before, maybe returning home. And then faced with catastrophe on the 11th, she moved towards the towers, as a doctor would. The absence of evidence in this view is just a sad consequence of the disaster's massive scale.
But this is exactly where the online debate really kicks in, and the persistent questions arise. While this heroic narrative is the official conclusion, many online sleuths, independent researchers, they're quick to point out it's a conclusion based largely on her proximity and the strong possibility of what a doctor might do in that crisis. It relies more on inference, on logical deduction rather than concrete, direct evidence of her actually being at the World Trade Center on September 11th itself. It's a narrative powerfully built on what makes emotional sense, contextual sense perhaps, but not necessarily on verifiable eyewitness accounts or undeniable digital traces from that specific morning. It's that key distinction between what's plausible, maybe even probable, and what is definitively proven.
And that specific point raises a really crucial question about the delicate balance, doesn't it, between plausibility and definitive proof, especially in a case so profoundly overshadowed by a huge, emotionally overwhelming event like 9/11. The desire for a heroic narrative, while totally understandable, can sometimes, maybe inadvertently, obscure the need for conclusive evidence.
Okay, moving on then. The foul play theory. This is arguably the most persistently compelling one among online communities who just aren't convinced by the World Trade Center narrative. This theory suggests something far more sinister happened to Sneha. A crime, perhaps, occurring before or right around the time of the 9/11 attacks.
And this is where her well-documented personal struggles become absolutely central to the speculation. Her alleged extramarital affairs, her history of substance abuse, while tragic parts of her life. They are, unfortunately, seen by some as factors that could have put her in vulnerable situations or brought her into contact with people who might have wanted to harm her. These parts of her life, if you detach them from the 9/11 context, are seen by people who support this theory as potential routes to foul play, making her a potential target for someone with bad intentions. The chaotic events of 9/11 in this grim scenario then become this convenient, almost perfect screen.
And this theory often leads back to the turbulent dynamics within her marriage. The mere existence of that restraining order against her husband, Ron Lieberman, combined with their generally tumultuous, reportedly volatile relationship, it has led some online groups to speculate about his involvement, or at the very least, it raises uncomfortable questions about the intensity of their relationship right before she disappeared. It's a really difficult, sensitive thing to talk about, but it is part of the public record, so it's part of the landscape of online discussion. While there's certainly no official implication of his involvement, the existence of those records definitely fuels certain lines of speculation.
And beyond her husband, there's the mysterious Chris she called her mother from on September 10th, or even a totally unknown person she might have met at a bar or a store during her evening out. They're theorized as potential perpetrators in this scenario, too. The underlying thought is maybe she encountered someone with bad intentions after leaving Century 21 or the Marriott later that night. Perhaps she went somewhere she shouldn't have, met someone she shouldn't have. This theory suggests her disappearance was the result of a personal interaction gone wrong, not a random act of terror.
And here's the really dark, almost unsettling angle that makes this theory so compelling for some people: the 9/11 cover-up idea. This insidious theory basically suggests Sneha's body was disposed of somewhere else, maybe by whoever harmed her, and the unimaginable chaos and mass casualties of September 11th accidentally provided the perfect chaotic event to mask or cover up a murder. The sheer scale of death and destruction, the world's focus on the WTC, the unprecedented logistical mess afterwards, could have inadvertently provided this comprehensive smokescreen for a more localized personal crime. The fact her credit cards and ID were left home but her phone was missing, that often gets pointed to for this theory, suggesting she didn't leave voluntarily and maybe her phone was taken or destroyed to hide her movements or communications from that night. It's a really chilling thought. A private tragedy just swallowed up by a massive public one.
It is cynical, but undeniably compelling. The idea that the unimaginable chaos, the emotional overload of that day, could serve as an unwitting shield for a personal crime. This perspective raises an important question, doesn't it, about how large-scale tragedies, just by their sheer size and the resources they demand, how they can sometimes accidentally obscure individual stories that might otherwise get significant attention and maybe lead to a clearer resolution. It's a sobering thought that the scale of a catastrophe could, ironically, help someone deliberately conceal something.
Okay, now let's look at the voluntary disappearance theory. This one is fueled heavily by those significant, well-documented personal struggles Sneha was facing. The core idea here is that Sneha was at that specific time in a truly desperate, maybe overwhelming place in her life. Caught in a bad marriage, she'd lost her job because of substance abuse issues. She was actively grappling with these profound personal demons.
And this theory suggests that the 9/11 attacks, for someone in a really desperate, tumultuous situation, might have presented an almost perfect opportunity to leave her old life behind. Without immediate suspicion, without intense scrutiny. It's a deeply unsettling thought, sure, but one where the absolute chaos of the day could be seen by someone in her state as an unexpected escape route, allowing her to vanish, maybe start over, without raising immediate alarms or drawing unwanted attention. The world's focus would be completely elsewhere, providing this unparalleled chance for anonymity.
And the subtle details of the evidence, or the lack of it, seem to fit this theory in some interpretations. For instance, could she have intentionally left her ID and credit cards at home precisely to make it harder for anyone to trace her, to sever ties with her past? The continued absence of a body, despite all the searching and the complete lack of any financial or digital activity after September 10th, that also aligns perfectly with this possibility. A complete intentional stop to her known life, as if she just ceased to exist in the official records.
Yeah, this is often described as a very cynical but compelling theory because it suggests a horrific national tragedy accidentally created this unique situation where no one would ever question her disappearance again with the same intensity or for the same underlying reasons if 9/11 hadn't happened. The overwhelming grief, the national focus on the attack, the sheer volume of missing persons cases, it could have provided this unlooked-for anonymity, allowing her to just slip away into a new beginning undetected by everyone left searching. It's a disturbing thought that such immense sorrow could be leveraged in a way for a personal escape.
And then we get into the other, let's say, wilder theories, the ones that sometimes surface in the deeper, maybe more unconventional corners of the internet. These are often far more speculative, less grounded in the established facts, but they're still part of the broader tapestry of online discussion around mysteries like this. One such theory, maybe born from deep concern, is suicide.
Well, the idea of her being in an emotional crisis is certainly plausible, given her documented struggles, absolutely. But crucially, there is absolutely no evidence suggesting she intentionally left the city for this purpose, and most significantly, nobody was ever found. Usually, even in tragic cases of suicide, remains are eventually discovered or a clear path and location are established. The persistent lack of a body just makes this particular theory incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to back up with any certainty. It remains a possibility, of course, but one lacking any real concrete support.
Another possibility sometimes mentioned, especially given the unprecedented events, is accidental death, unrelated to 9/11. This theory suggests Sneha might have died in an accident somewhere else downtown, maybe, and her body was just never found or identified amidst the overwhelming chaos and logistical nightmares after 9/11. The sheer scale of the disaster, the immense demands on emergency services right afterwards, could have accidentally prevented proper investigation or identification of other smaller incidents or individual tragedies. She could have just been a victim of circumstance, simply in the wrong place at the wrong time, in some non-9/11 related incident.
And then we venture into the really, really niche and frankly, less credible stuff you find in fringe forums, esoteric online discussions. The occult or symbolic theories. Some of these circles, they're always looking for deeper patterns or meaning in random events, right? They try to link her disappearance to like numerological symbolism, maybe based on the 9/10 date or even the precursor energy of 9/11. It's a way some people try to impose order or some kind of mystical significance onto things that are unexplained, connecting it to larger, often conspiratorial ideas.
Yeah, and for our purposes, it's really important to stress that these are mostly speculative and not credible, as our sources and just basic investigative principles confirm. They tend to stray really far from verifiable facts, logical reasoning, or, established forensic investigation methods, often just veering into pure conjecture, unfounded belief. We mention them just to acknowledge the sheer breadth of online speculation, but they hold very little weight in any serious inquiry. Okay, so let's unpack this further then. After sifting through the documented facts, analyzing those complex legal battles, considering all these different internet theories trying to explain Dr. Sneha Philip's disappearance, what does it all really mean as we try to understand such a complex, emotionally resonant, and just frustratingly ambiguous case?
What's profoundly compelling here, I think, is the Sneha Philip case is a prime example, almost textbook, of how a fundamental lack of concrete, indisputable evidence, this persistent void of certainty clashes head-on with a powerful, all-consuming national narrative, like the immense weight of 9/11. You've got this inherent human desire, and a legal desire too, for clear, definitive explanation. And it hits this impenetrable wall of ambiguous facts. That collision just inevitably creates intense friction and lasting unresolved questions. It's like a microcosm of the bigger struggle for truth in the shadow of mass casualty events.
It truly does. That long legal back and forth we talked about earlier, the family pushing desperately for her recognition as a 9/11 victim, the medical examiner demanding more conclusive proof. It highlights just how incredibly difficult it is to get to a universally accepted truth when there are no solid, undisputed facts to build on. It turns the search for a clear answer into this challenging exercise in interpreting plausibility, legally speaking, where the weight of grief can sometimes exert this powerful, almost undeniable influence on the process. This case really exposes how the judicial system, which is designed for definitive proof, sometimes has to reconcile with the impossibility of certainty when faced with overwhelming tragedy. It's a stark reminder that truth in a courtroom isn't always absolute fact. Sometimes it's a carefully constructed narrative meant to provide some order, some peace, even if the underlying facts stay elusive.
And this complex interplay raises a really important question for all of us, doesn't it? How do we, as individuals, as a society, process and deal with such profound ambiguity, especially when a national tragedy of that magnitude is involved? Where do we draw the line between a compassionate desire for closure and their rigorous demands of empirical evidence? The Sneha Philip case forces us right into that uncomfortable but necessary consideration.
Which brings us to that really dark, unsettling, thought-provoking idea we touched on, the concept of the perfect cover-up. We have to candidly discuss the possibility, however uncomfortable, that 9/11, this tragedy that instantly consumed the world's attention and resources, inadvertently provided the perfect opportunity for foul play or even a voluntary disappearance to be completely overlooked, and then just folded into the larger, overwhelming event. The sheer chaos, the unprecedented loss of life, the immediate focus on the attacks themselves could have provided this unparalleled, tragic veil for a more personal, localized crime or vanishing act.
It's a chilling, almost insidious thought, because it suggests the very scale of the tragedy could have accidentally protected a secret. Whether that secret was a deliberate escape from a troubled life or something much worse like a personal crime, the huge disruption of that day fundamentally changed the investigative landscape. It starkly highlights the cracks that can emerge even in the most thorough investigations when resources are stretched way beyond their limits, and the collective focus is understandably on a much, much bigger picture. It's a grim reminder that large-scale chaos can provide unintended refuge for smaller, hidden truths.
And here's another central, undeniable thread running through this whole enduring mystery. Sneha Philip's personal life. Her documented struggles, substance abuse, professional challenges, the clear turbulence in her marriage, they weren't just background details. They're absolutely central to nearly every single theory we've discussed today. They can't be and shouldn't be separated from the mystery of her disappearance. They provide critical context for any attempt to understand her final moments. So we have to ask ourselves, and you, the listener directly, do these profound personal struggles make her a more likely victim of foul play? Maybe by associating with harmful people in vulnerable moments? Or do they maybe make her a more plausible candidate for a voluntary disappearance, seeking escape from a life she found overwhelming? Or is it possible these struggles just paint a fuller, though tragic, picture of a deeply troubled person who was, by sheer horrific chance, unlucky enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, on a day that would change history forever? Each perspective feels plausible, right? Depending on which threads of her complex life you choose to pull and how much weight you give them. Her life, in a way, becomes this profound Rorschach test for our own interpretations.
And if you connect that to the bigger picture, it just underscores how deeply a person's individual circumstances, their inner world, their external struggles, can shape the entire path of a mystery. Even when it violently intersects with a massive global event, it complicates the easy answers, forcing us to deal with the messiness of human experience in the face of unparalleled tragedy.
Maybe the most baffling and therefore most passionately discussed single clue in this whole puzzle, her missing phone. Like we mentioned, when her husband Ron got back to their apartment after the initial shock wore off, he made that puzzling discovery. Her driver's license, credit card still at home, left behind, but her cell phone, conspicuously gone. It's a crucial, truly perplexing detail right at the heart of so many conflicting narratives.
What's truly fascinating here is the sheer paradox this presents. Why take your phone and device for communication, connection, but leave your wallet and official ID at home? Items essential for proving who you are, accessing money. This specific detail is just open to so many interpretations, and it's consistently a point of fervent, passionate discussion online. If she was rushing to help as a doctor, wouldn't she prioritize taking her ID for official access to emergency zones or hospitals? Conversely, if she was planning a voluntary disappearance, wouldn't she absolutely take her wallet and ID to start a new life, even if she ditched her old phone? The missing phone, alongside the left-behind cards, it serves as this powerful anchor for both the foul play and voluntary disappearance theories. Yet it also casts significant doubt on the simplest 911 victim theory as initially presented. It just leaves this profound void of certainty. It's a puzzle within a puzzle, really, begging for an answer that just remains elusive.
Ultimately, the overwhelming, pervasive impact of 9/11 itself just cannot be overstated in understanding this case. This case profoundly represents how those threads of truth aren't just tangled by an individual's personal life and private choices. They are fundamentally warped, complicated by the overwhelming emotional, legal, and historical weight of a national tragedy. It complicates everything from the initial frantic missing person search to the painstaking forensic work, and ultimately to that final compromised legal ruling.
It vividly highlights that stark intersection of deeply personal mystery and global catastrophe, making it incredibly difficult, maybe impossible, to fully separate one from the other. Her story, in an unsettling way, becomes this compelling microcosm of the larger, numerous, often unresolved questions left in the devastating wake of 9/11, reminding us that even amidst the grand sweep of history, individual human stories can remain agonizingly incomplete. In closing, I think it's profoundly important to acknowledge the dignity inherent in the enduring uncertainty surrounding Sneha Philip's fate. The raw, unresolved possibility that she either tragically died trying to help others in the face of unimaginable destruction, a true hero, or that she deliberately vanished before the towers fell, seeking to escape a life she found unbearable. It means that both outcomes, however different, remain disturbingly plausible. And her story, regardless of which scenario you lean towards, remains deeply, deeply tragic. It serves as a poignant reminder that not every mystery has a neat, conclusive answer. Sometimes the truth just remains permanently obscured by layers of sorrow, human complexity, and the relentless passage of time. Her disappearance is like a wound that continues to ripple through time, leaving us to ponder the unanswerable.
Thank you for approaching this deeply emotional deep dive with such compassion, thoughtful inquiry, and profound curiosity. The disappearance of Sneha Philip is indeed a powerful and enduring reminder of how deeply personal tragedies can be forever altered and perhaps even hidden by the immense shadow of larger cataclysmic events. This has been The Deep Dive. We invite you to share your respectful thoughts and theories about Sneha Philip's disappearance on our social channels, where the conversation continues. Next time on The Deep Dive, we head into the frozen, unforgiving Ural Mountains to revisit one of the most chilling and enduring mysteries of all time, the Dyatlov Pass incident. What could possibly make 9 experienced hikers flee their tent in the dead of night, tearing it open from the inside into sub-zero temperatures, only to be found days later, tragically deceased with inexplicable injuries? We'll try to unravel that baffling puzzle for you. We'll see you then.